In the uneasy quiet that followed the Korean War, a new kind of fear took root in the corridors of American power. Not of bombs or battalions, but of minds malleable, vulnerable, and dangerously open to control. It began with reports that stunned U.S. intelligence. American prisoners of war, once loyal soldiers, were confessing to crimes they hadn't committed, praising communism on foreign radio broadcasts, even refusing repatriation. To Washington, this wasn't just propaganda. It was proof that the Soviet Union and Communist China had unlocked a terrifying new weapon: brainwashing. The term itself, a rough translation of the Chinese exeneo, or mind cleansing, sent shivers through the highest levels of the Central Intelligence Agency. If enemies could reprogram a man's thoughts, loyalty, even identity, what hope was there for free will in the Cold War? By 1953, the CIA had already begun its response, not with diplomacy, but with science. Secret, unregulated, and driven by paranoia. The program bore a cryptic name: MKUltra. MK stood for the CIA's Technical Services Staff, and Ultra denoted its top-secret classification. At its helm was Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, a brilliant but enigmatic chemist with a stutter and a clubfoot, who believed that if the mind could be broken, it could also be rebuilt, or better yet, remotely steered. His mission was clear: develop techniques to manipulate human behavior for use in interrogation, espionage, and covert action. But to do that, he needed subjects. And not just any subjects, people who wouldn't ask questions, who wouldn't remember, and who could never speak out. The scope of MKUltra was staggering. It wasn't a single lab experiment, but a sprawling network of over 150 sub-projects, funded through front organizations and hidden in university departments, hospitals, and private research firms across the United States and Canada. LSD, lysergic acid diethylamide, became the star of the show. Discovered in 1943 by Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann, the drug was still poorly understood, but its ability to shatter perception, dissolve ego, and induce hallucinations made it irresistible to Gottlieb's team. They believed it could unlock the subconscious, force confessions, or even implant new beliefs. But testing it required human guinea pigs, and consent was not on the table. In bars, brothels, and safe houses, CIA operatives dosed unsuspecting citizens. In one infamous operation codenamed Midnight Climax, agents lured men off the streets of San Francisco into apartments outfitted with two-way mirrors. There, they were given drinks laced with LSD and observed as they unraveled, laughing, weeping, screaming, while hidden cameras rolled. The men never knew they were part of an experiment. Neither did the mental patients in psychiatric wards in Kentucky and Illinois, who received repeated, high-dose injections without their knowledge. Nor the prisoners in federal penitentiaries, promised reduced sentences in exchange for medical participation, though never told what chemicals coursed through their veins. Even within the intelligence community, deception reigned. In 1953, Frank Olson, an Army biochemist working with the CIA on biological warfare, attended a retreat at Deep Creek Lake, Maryland. Unbeknownst to him, his after-dinner coffee had been spiked with LSD as part of an internal test on non-consenting colleagues. Olson, a quiet man of deep moral conviction, became deeply disturbed in the days that followed. He spoke of resigning, of the ethical abyss he felt he'd helped create. 9 days later, he plunged to his death from the window of a New York City hotel. The CIA called it suicide. His family would spend decades seeking the truth. The experiments grew bolder. Beyond LSD, MKUltra tested everything: mescaline, psilocybin, barbiturates, paralytic agents, electroshock, at levels far beyond therapeutic use. At the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, under the direction of psychiatrist Dr. Ewan Cameron, funded secretly by the CIA, patients seeking help for anxiety or postpartum depression were subjected to psychic driving, days-long sessions of tape-looped messages played while under heavy sedation, combined with massive electroconvulsive shocks meant to wipe their minds clean. Many left permanently damaged, unable to recognize their own children. Cameron believed he was curing mental illness. The CIA saw him as a pioneer in mind control. All of this unfolded in total secrecy. Congress was never informed. Oversight was non-existent. The very premise of MKUltra defied the Nuremberg Code, established just years earlier after the horrors of Nazi medical experiments, a code the U.S. had helped draft, which required voluntary, informed consent for human testing. Yet here, in the name of national security, that principle was discarded. The moral calculus was stark. If the enemy might be weaponizing the mind, could America afford to play by the rules? For 2 decades, MKUltra expanded, mutated, and burrowed deeper into the shadows. Sub-projects explored hypnosis, sensory deprivation, and even the use of biological agents to induce temporary psychosis. Money flowed freely, over $25 million in today's dollars, funneled through dummy foundations like the Geschichte Fund for Medical Research, masking the CIA's fingerprints. Scientists, some aware of the source, others willfully blind, pursued knowledge with little regard for consequence. The line between defense and violation blurred until it vanished entirely. Then, in 1972, the tide began to turn. The Watergate scandal had shattered public trust in government secrecy. Investigative journalists were digging, and within the CIA itself, a growing unease stirred. When Richard Helms became CIA director in 1966, he had maintained MKUltra, but by 1973, facing mounting pressure and internal scrutiny, he made a fateful decision. On orders from Helms, nearly all MKUltra files were gathered and destroyed. Tens of thousands of pages, project outlines, subject records, financial ledgers fed into shredders or incinerators. The official rationale? National security. The effect? A near-total erasure of evidence. But not all of it vanished. A single warehouse in upstate New York, overlooked in the Purge, held financial records that survived. And in 1975, those fragments would ignite a firestorm. In 1975, the United States found itself reckoning with the hidden machinery of its own intelligence apparatus. The Church Committee, a Senate Select Committee chaired by Senator Frank Church, was formed in the wake of Watergate to investigate abuses by U.S. intelligence agencies. Amid testimony about domestic surveillance, assassination plots, and covert operations, a curious footnote emerged. References to a long-buried program involving mind-altering drugs and human experimentation. At first, CIA officials claimed all records had been destroyed. But then, in a stroke of bureaucratic oversight, or perhaps fate, a cache of 20,000 financial documents from MKUltra resurfaced in that forgotten warehouse in Tonopah, Nevada. They contained no experimental data, no subject names, no protocols, only payment receipts, grant approvals, and coded project numbers. Yet even these dry fragments told a damning story. The CIA had funded research at Harvard, Stanford, the University of Illinois, and dozens of other respected institutions, all while concealing its role. The public reaction was swift and horrified. Newspapers ran front-page headlines. CIA dosed Americans with LSD, mind control experiments on innocents. Families of victims came forward. The wife of Frank Olson, long told her husband had jumped in a fit of depression, now demanded answers. In Canada, former patients of Dr. Cameron sued the U.S. government, alleging torture under the guise of therapy. Congress held hearings, and for the first time, the architects of MKUltra were forced to speak, though many claimed ignorance, faded memories, or national necessity. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, who had retired to a cabin in Virginia and taken up goat farming, testified that he believed the work was justified by the existential threat of communism. "We were in a war," he said quietly, "and in war, people do things they wouldn't do in peacetime." Yet the moral weight of those actions lingered. How could a democracy, founded on individual liberty and bodily autonomy, sanction secret experiments that stripped people of their very sense of self? The ethical breach wasn't just in the methods, it was in the assumption that some lives were expendable for the sake of security. The victims were often the powerless, prisoners, the mentally ill, sex workers, soldiers, even children in some reported cases. Their voices had been erased twice, first by the drugs and procedures that scrambled their minds, then by the official silence that followed. In 1977, the Senate's Kennedy Committee, officially the Subcommittee on Health and Scientific Research, held its own hearings, this time focused solely on human experimentation. Senator Edward Kennedy pressed Gottlieb on whether he ever considered the humanity of his subjects. "Did it occur to you," Kennedy asked, "that these were American citizens?" Gottlieb paused. "I think we all felt we were acting in the interest of the country," he replied. But the answer rang hollow. By then, the Nuremberg Code was no longer just a relic of post-war justice. It was a mirror held up to America's own transgressions. The fallout reshaped U.S. policy. In 1976, President Gerald Ford issued Executive Order 11905, explicitly banning experimentation with drugs on human subjects without informed consent. Later, under President Carter, stricter guidelines were codified, and oversight boards became mandatory for federally funded research. The Belmont Report of 1979 enshrined three core ethical principles: respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. Direct responses to the failures of programs like MKUltra. But justice for the victims remained elusive. Lawsuits dragged on for years. In 1988, the Canadian government settled with Cameron's former patients, paying millions in compensation. The U.S. government, citing sovereign immunity, largely refused to pay. Frank Olson's family finally received a formal apology from President Ford in 1975, and decades later, in 2012, a symbolic settlement after new evidence suggested his death may not have been suicide at all, but murder. MKUltra was officially terminated in 1973, but its legacy endured not just in policy, but in culture. The program seeped into the public imagination, fueling conspiracy theories, novels, films, and a deep-seated distrust of government science. Ironically, the very counterculture the CIA feared, fueled in part by the very drugs it weaponized, became a force of resistance. LSD, once a tool of control, was embraced by artists, activists, and seekers as a path to liberation. Timothy Leary, the Harvard psychologist fired for his own psychedelic experiments, had once been tangentially connected to early CIA-funded research before breaking away to preach, "Turn on, tune in, drop out." The drug meant to break minds became, for many, a means to expand them. And yet, questions remain. How many subjects never knew they were part of MKUltra? How many lives were quietly shattered, their stories lost to time? The destruction of records ensured that full accountability would never come. Even today, historians and journalists piece together fragments, a name here, a grant there, trying to map the true scale of the program. Declassified documents continue to surface, revealing new layers. Collaborations with foreign intelligence services, testing on military personnel during the Vietnam era, even explorations into infrasound and microwave radiation as potential mind control tools. What MKUltra ultimately exposed was not just a rogue program, but a systemic vulnerability in the balance between security and ethics. In moments of fear, even democracies can drift toward the shadows. The Cold War created a climate where the ends seemed to justify any means, and in that calculus, human dignity became collateral damage. But the story of MKUltra is also a testament to the resilience of truth. Despite shredded files and sealed lips, the facts emerged. Not through grand revelations, but through dogged journalism, congressional courage, and the quiet persistence of families who refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. Their fight ensured that MKUltra would not vanish into history as a footnote, but stand as a warning, a reminder that the defense of freedom must never require its surrender. Today, as new technologies emerge, AI-driven behavioral prediction, neural interfaces, advanced psychopharmacology, the ghosts of MKUltra whisper a cautionary tale. The tools may change, but the temptation remains to control, to manipulate, to override the messy complexity of human will in the name of order or advantage. And so the question endures not just for governments, but for all of us. When fear knocks at the door of ethics, which will we let in? The echoes of MKUltra did not fade with the Cold War's end, they evolved. In the 1,990 seconds, as declassification efforts accelerated under the Clinton administration, thousands of additional documents trickled out, revealing that MKUltra was not an isolated anomaly, but part of a broader pattern of Cold War-era human experimentation. Projects like MK Delta, MK Naomi, and Artichoke, earlier precursors, had already tested truth serums, poisons, and interrogation techniques on unwitting subjects. Even the U.S. military had conducted open-air tests of biological agents over cities like San Francisco and New York, exposing millions to potential pathogens without consent. MKUltra, it turned out, was merely the most ambitious and most ethically unhinged branch of a sprawling tree of secret science. Yet what made MKUltra uniquely haunting was its intimate violation, not of the body alone, but of consciousness itself. Unlike a vaccine trial or radiation exposure, which altered physiology, MKUltra sought to hijack identity, the inner sanctuary where memory, belief, and selfhood reside. To lose control of one's mind is to lose the very anchor of reality. And for those who survived the experiments, the trauma was often invisible, dismissed as nervous breakdowns or pre-existing conditions. Many never received proper diagnosis or care. Some spent years in psychiatric institutions, their symptoms misread as schizophrenia or hysteria. Others vanished into obscurity, their lives derailed by a single, unremembered dose slipped into a drink. The CIA's rationale that the Soviets were doing the same has never been substantiated by credible evidence. Declassified Soviet archives later revealed that while Moscow did explore psychochemical warfare, its programs were far less advanced and never approached the scale or recklessness of MKUltra. In essence, the United States had built a moral labyrinth in response to a phantom threat, one that ensnared its own citizens. Still, the institutional memory of MKUltra proved fragile. By the 1982, a new generation of intelligence officers had risen, many unaware of the program's full scope. When the War on Terror began after 9/11, echoes of MKUltra resurfaced in the CIA's enhanced interrogation techniques, sleep deprivation, sensory overload, forced nudity, and psychological disorientation, all designed to break down resistance, much like the methods tested decades earlier. The Senate Intelligence Committee's 2014 report on post-9/11 torture noted disturbing parallels. The same belief that extreme psychological pressure could yield reliable intelligence, the same dismissal of ethical constraints in the name of urgency. History, it seemed, had not so much repeated as rhymed. And yet, MKUltra also left a quieter, more constructive legacy. In the wake of the scandal, bioethics became a formal discipline in American universities. Institutional review boards, IRBs, gained real power, requiring rigorous scrutiny of any research involving human subjects. The principle of informed consent, once honored more in the breach, became non-negotiable in legitimate science. Even the pharmaceutical industry, long criticized for its own ethical lapses, tightened protocols, partly in response to public outrage over government-sponsored abuses. Perhaps most unexpectedly, MKUltra inadvertently advanced the very field it sought to weaponize. The chaotic, often brutal data gathered during the program, though ethically indefensible, contributed, however indirectly, to modern understandings of trauma, dissociation, and the neurochemistry of consciousness. Researchers studying PTSD, for instance, found that the symptoms reported by MKUltra survivors mirrored those of combat veterans and abuse victims. Flashbacks, emotional numbness, a fractured sense of time. In a grim irony, the victims of mind control became unwitting pioneers in the science of psychological resilience. Today, the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal stands as a silent monument to this dark chapter. A small plaque, installed decades later, acknowledges the suffering that occurred within its walls. In San Francisco, the building that once housed the Midnight Climax Safe House is now a boutique hotel, no marker, no mention. And in the National Archives, boxes of MKUltra financial records sit cataloged but incomplete, like a skeleton missing its spine. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb died in 1999, having spent his final years tending his garden and reflecting, by his own account, on the moral ambiguities of his life's work. He never expressed outright regret, but in a rare interview, he admitted, "We crossed lines we shouldn't have crossed." But in that time, in that context, it didn't feel like a choice. That tension between duty and conscience, between perceived necessity and human rights, remains unresolved. As artificial intelligence, brain-computer interfaces, and neuropharmacology advance at breakneck speed, the questions MKUltra raised are more urgent than ever. Can thoughts be read, altered, or erased without consent? Who owns the data of your mind? And in an age of deepfakes, algorithmic manipulation, and targeted disinformation, is mass psychological influence already a reality just without the syringe? MKUltra was born of a specific fear in a specific time. But its core dilemma transcends the Cold War: how to protect a society without poisoning its soul. The program was shut down, its files burned, its architects retired, but the experiment, in a broader sense, never truly ended. It lives on in every debate over privacy, autonomy, and the limits of state power, and in the quiet moments when someone stares into the mirror and wonders, is this thought truly mine? The shadow of MKUltra stretches long, for history does not merely record what happened, it asks what we will do when faced with the same choice again. The final reckoning with MKUltra may never come, not in the form of a grand tribunal or a complete archive restored, but its lessons have seeped into the bedrock of modern democratic vigilance. In 2001, the U.S. government quietly declassified additional documents under the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act, revealing that some MKUltra researchers had consulted former Nazi scientists brought to America through Operation Paperclip, men who had conducted their own grotesque experiments on concentration camp prisoners. The moral irony was staggering. A program born to counter totalitarian mind control had, in its desperation, brushed shoulders with the very ideology it sought to defeat. Yet, even as these truths emerged, the victims remained largely nameless. Only a handful, like Frank Olson or the Canadian patients of Dr. Cameron, achieved any measure of public recognition. Most others faded into statistical silence. The sailor given LSD in a Norfolk bar and left wandering the docks in a panic. The student at a Midwestern university who volunteered for a sleep study and woke up screaming in a padded room. The New York social worker who, after a strange encounter with a man claiming to be from the health department, suffered debilitating anxiety for the rest of her life. Their stories survive only in fragmented testimonies, redacted memos, or family lore passed down in hushed tones. This anonymity was by design. The CIA's destruction of records wasn't just about secrecy, it was about erasure. Without names, there could be no lawsuits, no memorials, no accountability. And without accountability, the past becomes abstract, a cautionary tale stripped of human faces. But in recent years, historians, journalists, and citizen archivists have begun the painstaking work of reconstruction. Using surviving financial ledgers, university payroll records, and Freedom of Information Act requests, they've started to map the hidden geography of MKUltra, which hospitals hosted sub-projects, which professors received CIA funds under pseudonyms, which cities became unwitting laboratories. In 2018, researchers at Harvard uncovered correspondence showing that the university had accepted CIA money for psychedelic research in the 1,950 seconds, though the extent of non-consensual testing remains unclear. In 2021, a former patient at the Menninger Clinic in Topeka, Kansas, came forward with medical records suggesting he'd been given experimental drug cocktails without explanation during a routine stay for depression. Each discovery is a thread pulled from a frayed tapestry, but together they begin to restore dimension to the story. And then there is the science itself. In a twist few could have predicted, the substances once feared as tools of control are now being reevaluated as potential healers. In the 2010 seconds, clinical trials at Johns Hopkins, NYU, and Imperial College London demonstrated that psilocybin, the active compound in magic mushrooms, could produce profound, lasting reductions in depression and anxiety, particularly in terminal cancer patients. LSD-assisted therapy showed promise in treating addiction and PTSD. The very molecules MKUltra sought to weaponize are now under strict ethical protocols, offering relief to those suffering in the quiet prisons of their own minds. This renaissance is not without controversy. Critics warn of commercialization, of spiritual bypassing, of repeating past mistakes under the guise of wellness. But the key difference lies in consent, transparency, and intention. Today's researchers do not seek to dominate the mind, but to accompany it to create safe spaces where healing can emerge from within. It is a philosophy antithetical to MKUltra's core premise that the mind is a battlefield to be conquered. Still, the shadow lingers. In 2020, revelations emerged that the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, was funding research into neural interfaces capable of detecting intent before a person acts, raising fears of preemptive psychological profiling. In 2023, reports surfaced of Chinese scientists experimenting with AI-driven emotion recognition and cognitive enhancement in military recruits. The Cold War may be over, but the race to understand and influence the human mind continues, now accelerated by algorithms and brain-scanning technology far beyond Gottlieb's wildest dreams. What MKUltra teaches us is not that such research is inherently evil, but that without guardrails, it becomes a mirror of the society that wields it. In a democracy, science must serve humanity, not subjugate it. And that requires more than rules. It demands a culture of humility, of constant questioning, of remembering that the line between protector and predator can blur in the fog of fear. As the last living witnesses of MKUltra pass away, former agents, surviving subjects, investigative reporters, the responsibility of memory shifts to us, not to dwell in paranoia, but to remain watchful, not to condemn all secrecy, but to demand that it be bounded by law and conscience, and not to forget that behind every classified file, every coded project name, were real people, people who laughed, loved, doubted, and dreamed until someone decided their minds were not their own. The story of MKUltra is not just history. It is a living question, whispered in every policy debate, every ethics review, every moment we choose security over liberty or liberty over fear. And as long as that question endures, so too does the chance to answer it differently, to build a world where the mind remains, finally and forever, a sanctuary. In the quiet archives of the National Security Agency and the vaults of university libraries, the paper trail of MKUltra remains stubbornly incomplete, but its absence speaks as loudly as any document ever could. The deliberate erasure of evidence was not merely an act of bureaucratic self-preservation. It was an attempt to sever cause from consequence, to ensure that the architects of the program could retreat into plausible deniability, while the human cost dissolved into rumor. Yet memory, like consciousness, resists total annihilation. Families of victims have become unlikely historians. The Olsen family, for instance, spent over half a century piecing together the final days of Frank Olsen's life. Their persistence led to a 1,994 exhumation and autopsy that revealed blunt force trauma inconsistent with a simple fall, suggesting he may have been struck before being thrown from the window. Though the U.S. government has never admitted wrongdoing, the Olsens' fight forced a rare moment of reckoning. In 1975, President Ford personally apologized to the family in the Oval Office, an unprecedented gesture for a covert action gone wrong. Decades later, in 2013, a federal judge allowed their civil suit to proceed, stating that the state secret's privilege could not swallow the entire case. It was a small crack in the wall of impunity, but a crack nonetheless. Meanwhile, in Montreal, the legacy of Dr. Ewan Cameron's experiments continues to haunt the psychiatric community. Survivors like Jean Steele and Velma Orlico became vocal advocates, testifying before Congress and helping to shape Canada's 1992 Royal Commission on New Reproductive and Genetic Technologies, which emphasized informed consent as a non-negotiable pillar of medical ethics. Orlikow's lawsuit against the CIA, filed in 1980, was among the first to pierce the veil of sovereign immunity, arguing that the agency had violated international law by funding torture. Though the U.S. ultimately settled out of court in 1988, the legal precedent sent a message. Even in the shadows of national security, there are lines that cannot be crossed without consequence. And yet, globally, similar programs have surfaced in unexpected places. In the 1990 seconds, South Africa's apartheid-era Project Coast was revealed to have explored chemical and biological mind-altering agents for use against political dissidents. In the 2000s, allegations emerged that North Korea had subjected prisoners to sensory deprivation and forced ideological re-education, echoes, however distorted, of the very brainwashing fears that sparked MKUltra in the first place. The cycle repeats. Fear begets experimentation, secrecy begets abuse, and the vulnerable pay the price. But perhaps the most enduring impact of MKUltra lies not in policy or litigation, but in the cultural psyche. From the Manchurian Candidate to Stranger Things, from conspiracy forums to academic symposia, the idea of government mind control has become a modern myth, a symbol of institutional betrayal. While often exaggerated, this myth serves a vital function. It keeps the public alert to the dangers of unchecked power. In an era of deep-fake videos, algorithmic manipulation, and micro-targeted disinformation, the boundary between psychological influence and coercion has grown porous. The tools have changed, but the vulnerability remains the same. The human mind, open, impressionable, and infinitely exploitable. What distinguishes today's challenges is scale. MKUltra targeted individuals in hidden rooms. Modern digital ecosystems can shape the beliefs of millions in real time, often without their awareness. Social media platforms, designed to maximize engagement through emotional triggers, function as de facto behavioral laboratories collecting data, testing responses, refining influence. The ethical questions are no longer confined to government labs, but extend into the private sector, where profit motives can eclipse moral considerations. The ghost of MKUltra whispers a warning. When you treat minds as terrain to be mapped and manipulated, you risk losing the very humanity you claim to protect. Still, there is hope in vigilance. The exposure of MKUltra was not the work of a single whistleblower, but of a coalition. Journalists like Seymour Hersh, senators like Frank Church and Edward Kennedy, lawyers like David Karras, and ordinary citizens who refused to accept official silence. Their collective action proved that even the most entrenched secrecy can be pierced by persistent truth-seeking. Today, that same spirit lives in digital rights activists, bioethicists, and open government advocates who monitor the frontiers of neurotechnology and artificial intelligence. As we stand on the threshold of a new era, one where brain-computer interfaces may allow thoughts to be translated into text, where AI could predict emotional states from facial micro-expressions, where personalized neurochemical interventions might one day treat mental illness with unprecedented precision, the lessons of MKUltra must guide us, not to halt progress, but to anchor it in dignity. Not to fear science, but to demand that it serve, not subdue. For in the end, the true measure of a society is not how it defends itself in times of crisis, but how it treats the most defenseless among its own. The unwitting subjects of MKUltra were never enemies. They were citizens, some broken, some resilient, all human, and their silent testimony endures as a covenant. that the mind, in all its mystery and fragility, belongs to no one but itself. This is the legacy of MKUltra, not just a chapter in Cold War history, but a mirror held to the present, asking us, always, what kind of world we wish to build inside the minds of others and within our own.